Now that I've successfully escaped my own run-in with the law, let's talk games, specifically this game. What game? A game you probably have not heard of, though it does occupy space in my brain. What kind of space? Mainly confusion. We'll discuss, and hopefully this isn't too much of me rambling, though it might be, so be forewarned. Now, it could just be that this is a silly little game that the developers thought would be fun, so they started making it, and this is what came out of it, because what came out of it is equal parts kind of enjoyable, but also strange and annoying and frustrating and overly long. And yeah, I know all of this sounds hyperbolic. By the end of it, maybe you'll think I'm the woke police trying to take your fun away. No. This is the police.
Usually, before I go shaking my tits for the press, I like to go see how the professionals do it. Some might say the chief of police has no business in an institution like this, but in fact it's the quietest and safest place in town. You won't run into any reporters, nobody gets into any fights, nobody drinks too much, nobody even raises their voice. The place is owned by an elderly gentleman who knows how to keep things under control. That's why I never invite my friends here. I wanted to make an exception for my 60th birthday, but most of my colleagues are young enough to be my sons, and they'd rather just hire prostitutes. Why stare at some boobs when you can take the whole package for yourself? But there's none of that in our club. Even looking too long is considered indecent. You can get an occasional glimpse, like by accident. The rest of the time you just pretend that you're immersed in conversation, or just come by for a drink. Doesn't mean these gentlemen wouldn't want their bald heads smothered in tits. It's just that nobody says it out loud. My younger colleagues might call it hypocrisy, but I call it the good old-fashioned manners. Good manners and leave the rest unsaid. She agrees to unbutton her blouse, and we agree not to pay too much attention. The girls are on a quiet prowl, too. They're looking for a way out of their cramped rooms. Maybe make friends with some wealthy patron with a pacemaker and dentures. Everybody wants something. But we have to control ourselves, or we'll all turn into libertines and prostitutes. Hell, if there weren't any rules, I'd be belching and farting, jumping up on the table, arms held high, yelling, "Shake it, baby!" No idea how I got so barbaric.
You play as Jack Boyd. He is the police chief of the fictional city of Freeburg. I must confess before we go further that I played this game once before already, a few years ago. I got pretty far to like day 60, 62, but then I stopped. I lost interest. Seems to be a pattern of mine. You see, basically Jack Boyd is forced into retirement by the mayor. Jack resolves himself to make $500,000 before his 180 days left as police chief is up. He says $500,000, and not $1 million because everyone wants $1 million. He figured he would do something different. I guess it's as good as a reason as any.
How much are you looking to earn?
$500,000.
$500,000? Why not a whole million?
Because everybody wants to take $1 million. Figured I'd try something different.
$500,000 in 180 days? Well, you could earn it all above board if you netted all the big fish and hit all your bonuses.
So now here we are in 2020, I tried playing it again, and I struggled. See, there's two things that appear to be in direct opposition to each other in this game. The story that starts to set up this intriguing narrative and the gameplay that bogs down the pacing of that narrative. Let's do it a little different for this one, and I'll start with the gameplay. The gameplay loop is a little fun at first and very, very quickly though gets kind of repetitive and grindy. I apologize if I get very extrapolatory. Is that the right word? Extrapolatory? Extrapolatory. Sounds like a body part. Essentially how it works is you have your officers on staff. You have a limited amount, though you can at times throughout the game, like every 5 days, request an increase in the budget to hire more officers, increase SWAT efficiency, hire more detectives, or just increase your own salary. Because yeah, throw in some more cops, that'll solve crime. You're presented with your officers on screen here, and you get calls you have to respond to. Depending on the call, you may have to send multiple officers. The more you send, the higher their professional status, the more likely they are to succeed on the call. You can increase their professional status by sending them for training, or they'll increase their status naturally through successfully completing calls. You even get stripes you can use to promote officers to increase the professional rating further. The calls can be mundane, so occasionally there's false alarm calls. Sometimes you can identify them because it's just some guy in a park just screaming, "Ah, there's zombies everywhere!" Which seems like it would necessitate some therapy and possibly a cold shower. So you send some officers, they travel there and back, so you have to wait until they come back, basically a cooldown timer of sorts. So if another call comes in, you have to address it with who you have or wait and hope the timer doesn't run out to respond to the call. It sounds very interesting, right? But to be honest, it gets very repetitive very quickly. You're constantly just sending your officers on calls and then waiting for the next one. It's boring, because sometimes there's just a lull where not much happens. It could have been so much more interactive. Like, maybe if a call came up whilst all your officers were out, you could recall some of them, or have some of them go straight to the next call so as to save you time so you don't by chance miss any of them. Or maybe instead of all your officers starting at the police station, they could have had them be on patrol. You could assign officers to calls right away to slow down the timer to respond, while you called other officers if necessary. It would have dramatically increased the speed of gameplay and kept you engaged all at the same time. But really, the question is, what happens if you don't respond to calls? The offender escapes, unnamed civilians are killed, and everyone just kind of doesn't react. So you'll definitely want to do it yourself when playing to compensate for it. No, they all had so much to live for, like tomorrow. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, some strange stuff happens in this game. This is gonna be just one example, but there will be others. Hopefully it'll explain to you why I say I don't understand if this game is trying to be a social commentary or tongue-in-cheek, or it's just poorly written, or maybe you'll conclude that I'm overthinking it like I already suspect that I am. With that being said, sometimes you'll have to make choices on some calls. Early on, you respond to a call and some guy is robbing a store. If you sneak in through the back, you find a masked man holding the cashier at gunpoint. The scenario then says that the cashier is shouting something in another language. One of the options you can pick is to ask the cashier to shut up. But you don't just ask him to shut up, you say, "Quiet, Abdul, you're just making things more complicated." I was like, whoa, that's a little much. Is he actually named Abdul, or did we just hear a foreign language crying out and we were like, "Abdul, put a lid on it, okay?" Like, what is going on? Don't worry, my friends, there's more. You'll make other choices that don't involve calling foreigners Abdul. Like, do you point your gun at the suspect and tell them to stand down, shout on the loudspeaker and tell them that they're surrounded, or do you just open fire? See, I tried to never pick that last option because I was trying something new in this game. I wanted my cops to de-escalate situations. I'm not a big fan of this, the way the choices work on certain calls, because it just tells me my officers are nothing more than the cards on the screen. They can't think for themselves, which is crazy. Like, you'll send your people to investigate a carjacking and they find the car and there's no driver with the stolen car, and these idiots call you up and they're like, "What do we do, chief?" Like, search the car, what? Interview witnesses, come on, what are you doing here? Literally, like, what are you doing? Did you even go to the academy? I'm willing to bet that you didn't. So that's essentially what you do in the game the majority of the time. You send your officers on calls, sometimes they succeed, sometimes they don't and civilians die. Sometimes the officers themselves can die and you can tragically moor them for all of 5 seconds before just hiring more. As I said, you have a limited number of detectives as well. Occasionally investigations pop up, you assign some detectives to it, and then as time goes on, they collect frames in which you can use to put together to solve the crime. If you do, then your detectives and maybe the SWAT go in and arrest the suspect. I actually don't mind this part as much. It requires you to think a little bit and put some thought into the game rather than Get a call, send the best officers. Okay, done, rinse, repeat. To be honest, your detectives, they often just kind of suck though, like really bad. They're terrible detectives. And they can sometimes take days to return any evidence or frames from the investigation. So you'll end up archiving some of the crimes because there doesn't seem to be any real gameplay benefit to completing the investigation. If it's been too few many days, I just assume the purpose already long gone, so I move on with my life. Yeah, I know. Great attitude for the police chief to have. You have your officers and detectives put in overtime by asking them to come in on their days off. They do get tired, so you can't just run them dry. Occasionally they'll just call out with excuses your boss in real life would never let you get away with. There's one in particular that would drive me especially crazy. I was up all night reading an exciting detective story called The Last Temptation of Neptune, but I didn't have time to get to the ending. I'm almost certain the killer is Mrs. Clemens, but I can't rest until I know for sure. Can I go home and finish reading the book? Like, no, you can't. On what planet is that a good excuse? Imagine just calling your boss up tomorrow and telling them you want to finish a book that you're reading, so you're staying home for the day. This guy's family is looking at him probably like, hey, thought you were going to work today. And he's like, nah, I'm using my personal day to finish this book I was reading. And you think that's crazy? There's more. It's my dog's birthday. Can I go home to celebrate with him? No, you can't. I'm sure your dog is adorable and sweet, but I think if you celebrate with the dog later, they'd understand. They're offering free admittance to the museum today. I love art. Can I have the day off? No! Why didn't you plan for this? I know it's just a game, but how ballsy you gotta be to just call up your police chief and be like, hey man, I want to finish this book. I'm gonna catch you later though. Unbelievable. Sometimes they do it multiple times a day. Call out or just don't show up, and it's incredibly frustrating. Of course, you could fire them and forget they existed, which is probably a better option than just yelling about it right now. Later, you end up working with the mob to save your deputy chief, and you have to ignore calls for them and do jobs for them, and in turn, you can use them to scare the prosecutorial board that is set to testify against you because your employees are whiny as hell sometimes. Also, sometimes they just suspect you of corruption and decide to testify against you. Or you can just straight up have them dudes killed. Yeah, you can just straight up have them murdered. Yes, Jack Boyd isn't the patron saint, nor is he pretending to be, but it seems a little out of character for him to just be willing to off his own people because he doesn't want to get a stern finger wagging. Now, for me, I don't recall what happens if you let them testify, but I don't think there's any real consequences beyond some gameplay disadvantages like cutting your salary or your budget or how many officers you have. That's kind of weak. It's not super punitive. And even so, I have yet to see any far-reaching gameplay consequences for failing calls, losing officers, or getting your budget cut. Even later in the game, there's times there will be feminist protests, then the black community will protest, or the LGBT community. I think they meant LGBTQ, but who the hell knows if that was intentional and what wasn't. It could be that the game takes place in 1988 or 1980s and that's just what it was called. You're not really presented with a clear choice here. The mayor wants you to crush the protesters. You can do it and maybe make your time as a chief a bit easier, or really the only other option you have is to play woke cop and not do it. Yeah, I played woke cop. I know you might be shaking your head at this point thinking that it's not that serious, it's just a game after all, shut up, and you're right, I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. This is just my opinion, it's really okay. Fail a call? Okay. Try better next time. Lose an officer? Hire another one. Or even keep their body in the morgue and collect their salary for a few weeks. Look, I'm not saying you should do it, I'm just saying I did do it. Get your budget cut? Okay. Request an increase in a few days if they let you. Who cares? Literally, who cares? Sometimes the mob gets mad at you for not doing their bidding. Aside from a stern finger wagging, I haven't seen any lasting consequences, really. Everything can be undone or forgotten about in a few days. It's very underwhelming. Sometimes, citizens in the community will ask you for their help and ask you to send a few officers, and you will when they pay you. I'm not sure how ethical this is. I'm scared. I had an officer quit on me because he made a lot of money being a bouncer outside a club. To be honest, I kind of respect him. Godspeed, my friend. Had another randomly say he was done doing my useless tasks, so he had enough with me. That's okay, I'm quite insufferable. So there you have it. There's your gameplay loop. Sound fun? Yeah. Sounds fun. Try doing it for hours and hours and hours on end and over and over and over again. You might like that sort of repetition. I don't. Yes, I know Jack is only police chief for another 180 days, but that does not mean I want to play through 80% of those days doing the same things over and over and over and over again. It's tedious. Briefly, I'll just say in the sound design, it's nothing you haven't heard before. Police chatter, sirens, ambient people talking sound, not really that you would expect anything different from this game really. It's there to serve a very simple purpose. And I'll say briefly on voice, Jack is the only major character in this game whose voice is worth mentioning, and he sounds great, giving a kind of stern, commanding voice that can simultaneously carry a world-weary personality that can command the room when he needs to or show concern when the situation calls for it.
Hello?
I'm an addict.
Please, I don't want...
Listen to me, Lana. I really am an addict. For 20 years now, give or take. I've been lying to myself that I'm in control of the situation, and sometimes it really seems like I am, but sometimes in the more desperate moments, I become completely dependent on the pills. And it's just dumb luck that I haven't killed myself. Or someone else.
The only other standout, but less so, is Lana, a woman Jack comes into contact with about halfway through the game. She carries the trauma and also the grace and strength of a woman rather well, and it's carried through the performance.
I've been thinking, I promise you, it would be better if
No, it wouldn't be better. For the past few years, I've worked hard so that people would take me seriously, so they'd respect me as a professional. If I step forward now, I ruin all my efforts, my whole future. And I'll destroy my one chance to make this city better. I'll be a sympathy case, I'll be humiliated, and then I'll be attacked. And the one thing I won't ever get again is respect.
Lana,
everyone else sounds kind of cartoonishly evil or just not very interested in anything going on, so it's not super memorable. The story takes a while to get going. I would argue there should have been a give me the highlights version for the beginning because it doesn't get interesting until about halfway through, and by then you're so exhausted from the info dump that is the beginning portion of the story, it's almost a chore to force yourself to continue. In order for you to understand my commentary in the story, I'll have to briefly recap as I go just so you can understand why I find myself confused about how to feel about this game. Because often the story is very disconnected from the tools that the game gives you during gameplay. Now, I can recognize this may not be much of an issue to everyone, but for me, on some titles, I just can't suspend my disbelief all the time. I can't disconnect my role in every game with the gameplay. Now, what do I mean by that? So say you're playing as a morally good character who does not kill anyone, but in order for there to be gameplay, they need to allow you that opportunity to do so. And you can, but story-wise you aren't a killer. That might be an extreme example and maybe not a good one, but it's the best way I could describe the disconnect that sometimes happens between character and gameplay. It can be more subtle, like my character's son was kidnapped and they are desperately looking for the person who did it, but ooh, neat, there's a collectible or two over there. Oh, look at that, an odd job or two. That is a gamey aspect of most titles we have grown accustomed to, and sure, there doesn't always need to be a narrative reason for why the protagonist goes off the beaten path or has a gameplay ability they canonically in the story don't have. But This Is the Police is one of those games where I really crave that connection a bit more between Jack Boyd and the things you can do. Anyway, sorry I got carried away, I really just wanted to give some examples. Anyway, let's go over the story a bit. Just keep in mind I am fully aware I might be thinking about this way too much, but whatever, you're here, so let's do it. You play as Jack Boyd, or rather the game's protagonist is Jack Boyd, and you select certain inputs through menus that are understood to be the actions of Jack. He is the police chief of the city of Freeburg and is being forcibly retired by corrupt Mayor Rogers after Francis Kendrick, Boyd's deputy, was accused of corruption charges that in spite of being dropped have irreparably damaged their reputation. Boyd gives himself 180 days to build a retirement fund of $500,000, but suspects he can't make the money legitimately. Which is a weird choice for him as a character because Jack is being asked to retire because of his deputy being corrupt, but I guess that's the plot setup. Characters do dumb things which necessitate the events of a plot, so not a big deal, who cares. Later, Kendrick asks Jack to become an inside man for the Mafia because they're done with him, so he needs your help to escape. Depending on Jack's accepting the offer or not, Kendrick either escapes or is murdered alongside his family. I opted to help Kendrick because to be honest, there's really no benefit to letting him get absolutely slaughtered. Really, like, you end up in the same spot anyway, unless you're just a cruel person with cruel intentions. Now Boyd, your character Jack Boyd, becomes Sand's new inside man and weighs the risks of openly defying the mob while remaining true to his personal morals. A new gang, calling themselves the Varga, soon arrives in Freeburg, defying Sand's dominance, and both Sands and Varga asks for Boyd's support in the conflict. Eventually, either Varga or Sand will take control of the criminal underbelly of Freeburg with your help. Now, you may think, wow, that's really interesting. What could they do with such complex plotting? Nothing. I mean, seemingly nothing. There doesn't seem to be any tangible difference between the two. Do you want a crazy gang with no discipline or organized crime? Great choices. Also, it never really fully explained why, after Kendrick is safe, why Jack could not just refuse to work with the gangs anymore. Yeah, he wanted the money, but he was just under no actual constraints to help, or at least to my knowledge. Meanwhile, Boyd's wife has disappeared, running off with a younger man in a kind of bizarre subplot. Her mother helps Boyd track her down, and a personal investigator helps to find her lover. However, the day he's supposed to meet with his wife, he is struck by an unknown assailant who puts him into a coma. He then suffers a nightmare about being corrupt, which I don't know why he would have a nightmare about it, because he kind of already is. I don't get it. Robespierre, a person with a fantastic alias, gives Jack a limited time to bring the surviving crime family to justice. Otherwise, he will kill the head of the reigning gang personally as a favor to Freeburg. He reveals himself to be Eugene Chaffee, a wealthy businessman who wants Jack's assistance. In turn, he offers to be an informant for Jack, engaging the opinions of the city. Now, you remember our old pal Mayor Roberts? Turns out he's not only a corrupt scumbag, he's a rapist as well. I promise I don't mean that to sound like I'm making light of it, it's just there's no way to give you that information any better. Anyway, the women that the mayor has assaulted start turning up dead at the hands of a serial killer known as a dentist. Jack is forced to work behind his own department to find the killer, and he deduces that Eugene Chaffee organized a copycat killer as a means of exposing Mayor Rogers' connections to the victims. Which is a bit excessive, no? You have a guy who legit just had a whole bunch of people murdered because he wants to expose the mayor for being a bad dude. That's kind of dark. Jack then turns to his relationship with Lana Berman, a prosecutor who was raped by Rogers who wants to prosecute Jack on corruption charges. Despite Jack's attempts to explain things to her, he fails, and they sever their relationship. Jack overdoses and is hospitalized from the stress of the events. He returns to the department to find that the election season is well underway, and it's likely that Mayor Rogers, regardless of what happens, is going to rig the election to ensure that he wins. Chaffee still wanting to run in the election despite all of this, the political tension begins to come to a head. Okay, I'm gonna stop here. If you got that far through, thanks for sitting through that slog of a summary. So, there's a lot going on in the narrative, but it's honestly not terrible. Jack being forced out by a corrupt mayor and trying to make some of his money so he has something to show for his decades of long career is believable, as is his desire to get his wife back, though the way that plays out is kind of bizarre. But I find it hard to believe that Jack, as much of an asshole as he is, would be okay with killing his own officers should they report him for misconduct, or do something that he does not like. Like when you're looking for the dentist sends him a message saying not to reveal anything to the feds or the police, because then he'll leave for good and the trail will go cold. One of the officers is scripted in the game to discover you're holding evidence and bring it to the police themselves. So you have to basically have them killed, or yeah, I don't think there's another way around it. Maybe I missed something, or maybe I don't know. I'm sweating. I'm totally overthinking this, aren't I? The other thing that doesn't sit with me either is the game's longevity. Given the stakes of the narrative, there's just too much time spent dicking around. Yes, you're a cop, rather the police chief, but gameplay-wise, there's not much beyond what I described, so a lot of it just feels like padding out the game, which really breaks up the narrative. Everything I described to you in the narrative and the story sounded rather interesting, right? Well, imagine then you have to sit through days and days and days of just sending cops on calls, investigations, and getting calls from the corrupt rapist mayor about how he's gonna make your last days in your job a nightmare because you won't give in to his quasi-authoritarian rule over Freeburg and crush protesters in dissent for him. Imagine that, but with no major story developments for long stretches of time, and you have to deal with your dumb officers wanting to finish their favorite novels or take their dogs to the park. What you have is a game that is padded out, when arguably its best and most intriguing aspect is its story. Not everything here is great. I mean, the dialogue isn't always great. It's okay, but sometimes it feels like the characters are giving me a wink and a nod, like, hey, I'm saying something cool and poetic. What do you think? Good writing, huh?
But if she's ready to talk, she's getting ready to come back. You just need to find the right words. You can find the right words, right, Jack?
I'm not an idiot.
I didn't ask for this, Jack. It's the middle of the night, and I'm alone on an old farm, 40 minutes away from anywhere, sat on a creaky porch, and now I'm getting snapped at. I came here so you could personally promise me that you'll be able to find the right words. So let's try again. You can find the right words, right, Jack?
I can find the right words, Mrs. Markham.
That's good to hear. Tomorrow night at 3 o'clock at the Octopus Restaurant. You know it?
Yeah, but
But
it's
yeah,
closed
yeah,
at
I'm offering no solutions, just critique. Well, I would have proposed maybe making the penalties more substantial, like maybe when you piss off the mayor, they make you retire sooner, meaning you reach the conclusion sooner, and maybe this alters the endings you can get a bit? I don't know, it seems like a lot of my issues that I had with this game could have just been resolved by trimming some of the fat. That way the pacing would have been a lot better. Or maybe have more time jumps. Jack has 180 days left and you could play through quite a bit of them. Not all 180, that would be crazy, but you could probably play this game for an easy 10 hours and only get to day 60. Yeah, that's not really a lot, right? No. Well, again, keep in mind this game keeps you repeating the same gameplay loop with minimal changes day in and day out, so it does get tedious very quickly. Also, again, there's times the mayor asks you to interfere with protests, and the game doesn't make it apparent, but you can just refuse these requests, which I did, but there's little penalty for gameplay besides a swift slap on the wrist, and it's not clear why Jack would go along with some of these things if you do them. There's no mention of it really at all in the story, so this is what I mean when I say there seems to be a disconnect between the gameplay and the story in a way where it's almost like they made the story for the game and then put the gameplay together next, so they don't feel to be working in tandem and working together symbiotically. It's almost like they made two separate games and then decided to put them together, so you get a disjointed gameplay experience from a rather well-written narrative. There are some off-color comments, but I guess that's something you would expect from a game that takes place in the 80s, but it did throw me off at first. I was almost ready to come here and criticize the game for some of that, but then I thought it's likely part of the time that this game is placed in, so I don't actually mind it. Backroom dealings and sinister plots, there's enough here to craft a compelling experience all around, and yeah, I know it's a strategy game, but I wonder, what if it wasn't? What if it was a point-and-click adventure? Dialogue choices, more choice and consequence? Again, this is mainly because the gameplay feels padded out and not like it's there for any substantial reason other than to make you feel like you're putting real input into what's going on, when really you're just kind of killing time until the next story event or moment. Anyway, sorry if I rambled and for this video being overly long. I'm not knocking you for liking it because its opening hours are fun and some of the things I did criticize the game for do add to its charm a bit and do make me laugh, but that doesn't save it entirely for me. Obviously, I wouldn't blame you if you got this game on like a sale and enjoyed it, because honestly, it's not terrible. It's just hard to argue that it's a game worth finishing. No, I didn't finish it. Both times I played it. Mainly because it just got kind of tedious and boring. I normally like to beat the games that I talk about on this channel before I do in fact make a video on them, but I feel like I played enough of this game to give it a bit of a critique. Sorry if that ruins my credibility a bit, and sorry for continuing to say sorry. I will eventually try to finish it, but I just can't find the motivation right now, and that's key with any game because yes, games are for entertainment, but they can be a commitment and even feel like one if it's not well-rounded. And I know this game has a sequel, This Is the Police 2. It looks exactly the same, but what do I know? If I finish this game, I will let you guys know with a brief update to my critique here. If I don't, then this will be the last you hear of it. Unless we somehow find our way to This Is the Police 2, which we might. Anyway, thanks for watching if you made it this far. I'm Ryan, and if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment. If you for some reason just don't like the video, and you hate me, give it a thumbs down. I can't tell you what to do. Also, subscribe if you want. Thanks. I love you. Maybe.